Göran, you started with Mentice in 2008. You have a engineering background, and you came really from the high-tech sector, from automotive and industrial markets. So you came from that background into virtual reality simulation in medicine. Was that really a very big jump?
I wouldn't say so, Tony. I mean, I've always been working with high tech or technology and selling advanced technology into a B2B environment. So that's pretty much the same. And the main focus is to understand how can your technology solve problems for the clients, and that's same regardless of what you sell, really. So from that perspective, it was known to me. Obviously, I had to learn a new area, application area, and so that was all new. But the basic thing was fairly similar, I would say.
So what did you make of this newish industry? I mean, because back in the early 2000s, like virtual reality simulation in medicine was relatively new. Medicine, the Swedish company, Mentice, Swedish company was fairly much at the forefront of where things were going. So what did you make of it, and what did you think the challenges were?
I mean, I think my first impression was really I was amazed by the passion among among our people, obviously, but also among physicians and nurses and their dedication to provide care for patients and to try to make things right. I think that was probably what I first sort of noticed. But from a challenge point of view, I would say that the difficult thing, I mean, we always talked about the big opportunities, obviously, in hospitals, and provide structured training for doctors, for physicians. But what I faced very early on is the fact that training is not really connected to return on investment or to value. In a lot of cases, training is just a cost item. So it's really hard to find a structure to allocate the right resources, both financial and people resources, to provide training in a structured way. And in many situations, I would say that training worked just because you had physicians and others being passionate about training and they investing their own time. But in a continuum, that just doesn't work. So I think that's one of my biggest challenges early on. But in a lot of cases, that's still the same, really.
And in 2026, do you think so? That was in 2008. There, that was a big issue. And today, do you still think that's a big issue?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, because in a lot of cases, simulation is tied to training of fellows and residents, or a gradual medical education. And that's still the same, really. Obviously, both you and me believe that simulation should be used for practicing physician in the continuum, and that's different. But yeah, I say largely the same. I think from an industry point of view, simulation has come a long way, where we 20 years ago were focusing on more basic learning, imaging, catheter and wire techniques, things like that. While today, I mean, the simulation can provide way more advanced training on complicated devices in complicated kind of procedures. So that from that point, I mean, simulation have improved quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. There was a recent article, I think it was a JAMA or the New England Journal of Medicine, where they were complaining that academic medical centers in the past were seen as the leaders in education and training, and now more and more profit and the business ethos is moving into it, and the trainees, the residents, are really seen as service providers. But the problem is, okay, they're service providers, but the primary duty of the hospital or the university is the training of the resident and keeping the skills up of the experienced and attending physicians. And the pace of change with medical devices is just astonishing.
Yeah.
I mean, we developed the metrics for a cryoablation device, and it's now, in less than 2 years, it's been superseded by another device. And physics-based simulation would seem to me to be the ideal solution. So is the return, the business attitude and the return on investment by the hospitals, by the training organizations, do you think is that distracting from the one of the primary businesses they should be involved in, that's training?
No, I don't see that as a main problem. I think it's actually ultimately good to have a commercial drive and a commercial push to become better. So I think that should help, So I don't think that's an issue.
But I mean, if it interferes with the training and the insistence on the quality assurance of the people that work for the organization, where training and quality assurance of performance is pushed to the side, surely that is an issue. I agree with you about the business. Okay, it's a harsh world out there and organizations do have to make a profit. I really don't have an issue with that. But what I do have an issue is if you've got a responsibility to do something such as training, such as quality assurance and performance, that has to fit into the scenario somewhere, and that's going to cost money. That doesn't come for nothing.
Yeah. No, I can hear you. I can see that. Yeah.
So my research has shown that any simulation without metrics is a suboptimal tool for procedure-based training. What's your view on that conclusion?
No, that's true. I mean, I completely agree with that. I mean, I would say there are more use cases and scenarios for the use of simulation than learning a specific device or procedure. But if we talk about a structural learning to reach a defined level of skills, clearly metrics-based or proficiency-based progression is the way to go. So with that I completely agree. Yeah.
And so what's the major challenge for simulation companies to implement performance metrics? Because we've had this conversation many times. Absolutely. And we've gone all the way from characterizing the procedure to building the metrics into one of your simulations. And the mechanical thrombectomy for acute stroke is probably one of the best examples, where Mentice were pushed to build and subsequently patent a new device because the clinicians were unhappy with part of the simulation. I mean that was almost a perfect example. So what's the issue or the challenges for the simulation company to build the metrics into the simulation?
I mean, there's a couple of things connected there, but I would say, to simplify it, I would say that the biggest issue for us is the process of defining and validating the metrics. I mean, we as a technology provider, solutions provider, have a hard time pushing that onto the device companies. So I think that is a fairly complicated process to require the device companies really think that through properly. And if that's not done before we get engaged, that I think is the harder issue. And in a lot of cases, when we do that, we don't have time enough or the company doesn't have time enough to make that happen, or to get taken back by the effort or the cost of that process. So I would say that is for me probably the biggest hurdle.
But surely it shouldn't just be the medical device manufacturers. Surely it should be professional medicine. You mean the departments of health? Because the evidence shows that somebody that trains on a simulation with validated metrics, with performance benchmarks, they perform about 60% better in the clinical environment. Surely professional medicine and departments of health should have a significant chunk of that cake, unless they want industry to own the metrics.
I absolutely agree with you, but if you look at the view of this right now, at least if you ask me, if you go to US and ask hospital and physicians who do you think is responsible for the training, they would, in my mind at least, link it to the device, and then they say it's the company's responsibility. So I think it's the question of who owns that responsibility. And I agree with you. It should be the hospital and the providers of healthcare. But right now, in my mind, it's not the case.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And a lot of medicine complains that that the medical device manufacturers own the metrics and so on. And I've said to them, okay, if you want the metrics, you're going to have to develop and validate them and own the benchmarks. Otherwise, I think professional medicine is going to end up being controlled from outside their organization. And that's not a good position to be in. But there seems to be a naive understanding of, like you just described, about the development and who owns it and so on. I mean, I think probably we need something of an equivalent effort as the genome program, where the professional medicine has to develop, validate the metrics, set the benchmarks, and then go to the simulation companies and say, okay, these are our metrics. Can you build these into your simulation? And there needs to be some sort of negotiation, the negotiation similar to what we had for the mechanical thrombectomy that worked out, I mean, almost perfectly. I mean, it wasn't 100% perfect, but it was pretty good. So many of my clinical device manufacturer colleagues seem to have a very naive understanding of why physics-based virtual reality simulations are so expensive. Why do you think that is?
I think that there are more and more companies that really understand what you're talking about, and obviously, I mean, you and your team have been working with this now for many years, and I think there is more and more people that really get it and understand the value. But I think my simple view of this is that if you get to the training responsibility or the marketing department right now with industry, it's not in their budget, it's not in the scope, and maybe not in their responsibility to provide training in the way you provide. I think that if I take a bit of a different approach to that, it's also not only for fellows and residents, because that's a lot of the training that we work with is related to more advanced devices like heart valves and things like that, where you typically start using them, I mean, past your specialization, or maybe, I mean, into your 2, 3, or 4 or 5 year term after you have graduated as a specialist, and so it's not only really for the gradual medical education trainees. It's really much longer. So I think it's it's a question really what you relate to. I think in hospitals, to relate back to you said initially, they don't really have right now a process to define training programs like that. We have very few, if any, development initiatives with hospitals or with healthcare providers. I mean, all of our discussions on developing new modalities or functionalities related to the device industry. So it just doesn't seem like that have come to that point where hospitals actually define a program for a specific task.
Well, actually, Göran, I wasn't actually thinking of the residents. I was actually thinking of the consultants learning to use a new device or a modification of a device.
Yeah.
Because okay, I do hospitals, but I also do quite a bit of work with industry.
Mm-hmm.
And they complained to me about the price of a physics-based virtual reality simulation. And I said, hold it a second. This can be used anywhere in this country with the same standards, with the same. This can be used anywhere in the world. With the same metrics. And they seem to have a view that a physics-based virtual reality simulation is something like a video game. You just switch the video and that's it. They don't seem to understand that it takes programmers and engineers like months and months on hours of work. That's never mind the physical engineering to actually build the simulation, that the simulator, the mechanical or electromechanical they don't seem to understand that you just don't do this in 5 minutes.
Yeah, but I also might think, Tony, sorry to interrupt. I also think, Tony, that it's a question of what is the scope for simulation? What is the ambition you have? How do you calculate that value or the alternative cost of not using simulation? So I think there's more to that. I think if you really look at what you could use simulation for, if you have the program you talk about, if you have a structured training to provide a defined skill set of a group of physicians, and you can calculate the value or compare with the alternative cost of having people go through real cases with proctors over a 3 or 6 months period. You can easily see that the value of what you provide with simulation is very, very high. But I don't think we do that comparison in a fair way.
And so why is that not being done? I mean, Stefano Pugliati published a paper a few months ago that basically demonstrated that, with a relatively large group, about 500 group trainees, I mean, whatever level, that proficiency-based progression simulation training costs about a third of what it would normally cost without. I mean, this wasn't super difficult to collect the information and the data. So why is medicine not doing that? Because we know that suboptimal performance leads to worse outcomes, and worse outcomes cost money in terms of hospital stay, and so why do you think medicine has not, the business of medicine has not been collating this information?
I mean, it's a big question, I think, but I mean, my view is what we touched upon earlier on here. It's an unclear responsibility, really. Who's responsible for this? I mean, if you look at industry, it's obviously very hard for industry. It's a sensitivity in measuring the connection between providing training and the sales of a clinical device, as you know. That's one sensitivity, but it's also unclear if it's the industry's responsibility. And I know you say it's not to tell a doctor or a group of doctors that they are not ready to perform that procedure with that device. But the question is who have that responsibility? Is it the regulatory bodies? Is it the societies? Is it the hospital health providers? Or is it? I mean, I think it's a lot of things there in terms of the stakeholder responsibility that is not clear. So I think that in my mind need to be worked out in order for this to be clear. How should this be done?
But it hasn't been worked out, and we've sort of, I mean, even if we go back to the Berkmar study in 2013, we've known that suboptimal performance of experienced clinicians, we knew they were probably going to have bad outcomes. What we didn't anticipate was the magnitude of the difference. I mean, it was like something like 50 to 80% difference in terms of the data. I mean, like we're talking more than a decade later, and it doesn't sound like much has happened.
Yeah. No, it's frustrating. I completely agree, but I think it's a question of, and I probably should have said that for the challenge I faced initially, but I think that's really one of the challenges, that if you come into the group of a hospital or a group of physicians or whatever, it's really hard to understand who have the authority to determine who can do what, or who's ready to perform a procedure or not. To me, that's not clear. I think a lot of that is need to be worked out, and it's clearly not.
Yeah, I mean, 20 odd years ago, the device manufacturers suspected that a lot of their device failures wasn't really to do with the device, because, I mean, for example, they explanted like a pacemaker or CRT that had failed, and they'd get it back to the production facility to dismantle it. There's nothing wrong with the device. And they sort of suspected that maybe it was to do with the clinician, but they couldn't say that. Today, they actually have the metrics to say, okay, that procedure wasn't done well. I mean, one of the interesting examples was Yaro Mascheroni published a study in JAMA Open a couple of years ago where the training, he did proficiency-based progression, virtual reality simulation in Medtronic's headquarters in Switzerland, and he compared it to the best example of what they would normally do. Nobody in their normal training, their controlled or their standard training group, nobody demonstrated the proficiency benchmark. But in the PBP group, it was 93%. That was a very hard message for Medtronic to accept. I think they accepted, but it was a very hard message for them that basically nobody in their best example of training that they offer, nobody demonstrated the proficiency benchmark. And I think they get that the skills of the operator impacts on outcomes, and I think they're grappling with, okay, what do we do with that?
As you said, I think the evidence is utterly clear that volume and skill set have a massive impact on outcome. And I think, I mean, my view is that I think right now I would probably think that in the industry, leaders in the industry need to take the step. And I think if you have one or two of the large medical device companies taking the step of providing structured training and really providing training to define skill set, that will change the perspective, and everyone else need to follow. You know, that to me is probably the most logical path right now, because I don't see any clear next step if you follow me.
Yeah. I mean, the device industry, they're legally mandated to supply instruction for use. I was in Leuven yesterday, for PhD Viva, and the Viva was on proficiency-based progression training for a circular stapler. Circular stapler is about €500. It has about 27% leak and complication rate, and a third of the patients that have a leak will die. This is a €500 device.
Yeah.
And we had the device manufacturer train according to the instruction for use, the best trainers that they had in comparison to proficiency-based progression. The standard training, the industry training, had a 1/3 leak rate. The proficiency-based progression train group had none.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not physics-based virtual reality simulation. This is simulation on a circular stapler with an animal model tissue. And the industry's looking at this and going, our IFU doesn't work. And I think they don't know what to do with that level of evidence.
But I think it's as I said before, it's very sensitive for a device company or their representative to make the judgment or tell physicians that might be their friends or at least their clients that they're not ready. So I think there's a large degree of sensitivity there. So I think that needs to be worked out in a proper way.
What I've been trying to say to them is they're not saying to them that they're not ready. What they're saying is you're not ready yet. Yeah, and the metrics aren't the simulation company's metrics or the device manufacturer. They are the metrics that are developed from clinicians who are good at the procedure. They're validated with clinicians who are good at the procedure. So it's not really the device manufacturer saying, it's the metrics from their peers that are saying they're not ready yet.
No, but I would agree. I think it would be logical that you have. I mean, I think more and more, if you look at in the US, both you and me have spent quite a bit of time on US hospitals, and so. I mean, the move there to more and more clinical leadership in hospitals, to me, would make it probably more simple to find a way where you have a CMO, chief medical officer, or so, able to control that more as a team leader and say that this is a structure, here's what we're going to do, here's the requirement, you need to get to this point before you start doing the procedure, and then you can work together with a device company to make that happen. I think that's more logical, where maybe in other situations where you have a clinical leadership and then you have a financial leadership of a hospital, and those two never sort of work together, and you have a group of physicians that everyone make their own decisions. And I think there's a way to get there where you can work together between industry and hospitals. But that I still think that's today still is the largest issue. That there's no clear structure there. Who make those calls?
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that article that I mentioned earlier on about the business ethos in academic medical centres, I think that's attempting to confront that problem that you've just characterised.
Yeah.
I mean, I work a fair bit with industry, particularly about the rollout of new devices, and industry gets that they're going to have to, have a simulation for it. But the issue that I see is they approach the clinical education division about 6 months before they go to market. And they say to them, okay, we want you to build a curriculum now and get ready for going. I've been very explicit. I think that's wrong. I think it's the wrong approach. I think that as soon as the device manufacturer knows that they're going to market, they should go to the education division and say, right, I want you to construct us a curriculum. I think that the education division should build the metrics and so on. And that probably should be about 2 years in advance. How long would how long would you like to be able to, build the metrics for a new device into the physics-based VR simulation?
I mean, first of all, to say, I think if there were a structure where a device company started much earlier and they created the metrics, defined the metrics, and validated them prior coming to us, I think that would be fantastic, because that means that we have clients that is way more prepared and have a clear understanding for what you want to achieve. And I think at that point, if we are there, I think the extra effort for us to implement the metrics was not significantly delay the project. I mean, I would say typically depending on the complexity of the device and the procedure, it will take us 3 to 6, maybe sometimes up to 9 months to create the program based on specification. And I think if a customer comes to us with already defined metrics, validated metrics, I don't think it's going to delay that process significantly. We're going to do it in principle in the same. Maybe it's a delay of a month or so. So I think the most important change would be what you said, that the company take responsibility for the definition and the validation of the metrics prior to coming to us. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I've had this conversation with some of the device manufacturers, and they're complaining about the simulation company. I said, hold it a second. What are you complaining about the simulation? I mean, your conversation with them is imprecise. What you need to do is you need to go to the company, the simulation company, and say, these are our metrics. Can you build them into your simulation? Because if you can't build them in, we're not interested. And then it's a negotiation. Which ones can you build in? And the device manufacturer needs to have. They're not doing that. I mean, I don't think it's the education division. I don't think it's necessarily there. They're given much too short a period of time, and they seem to be more wanting the simulation as a marketing tool rather than actually, an effective simulation tool.
I don't think they have got that it's not the task they have got initially. I mean, they have got the task to define a program to provide initial training for the device and so. So I think that if you have the approach that you are suggesting, it probably would require people from development and other parts of the company to be involved as well, because you probably need way more technical understanding for the details of the procedure and the requirement for the device and so forth. And I think that we would have a different dialogue with the client in a lot of cases today. I mean, a lot of our clients are super smart and very skilled, but still we see many situations where the perspective or the scope of a project changes multiple times during the project, because they haven't done that work prior coming to us. We're defining the program as we starting the project, which I don't think is the right way.
I mean, but the irony is that the manufacturer has a lot of this information inside the company anyway. I mean, with the human factors people. I mean, when we met with a manufacturer that was producing a new robot, we had to have a conversation with the human factor, and they were uncomfortable with our metrics because they thought we were trying to change the human factors, benchmarks and information that they'd provide. And once they understood we weren't, all we were trying to do was operationalize it to build into a simulation. They were fine, but they have this information anyway, so I'm not really sure why they're not actually using this information to help build the metrics. To go to slightly different tack, I mean, everybody's buzzing about AI at the minute. Basically, the amount of money that's being spent on it is astronomical. I mean, will AI, in your opinion, do you think it's going to help with metric-based scoring in real time to give feedback on the VR simulation to the trainee? And if it is what sort of time frame are you going to put on it?
I think it's probably a bit premature, and I'm maybe not the right person to answer that question. I certainly think that AI would have a big play also there. I mean, I can say that AI already have an important role in our development. I mean, we use it for speed up code generation. We use it to improve segmentation. I mean, the process to convert CT scans into 3D graphical models or anatomies. I believe we can use AI much more effectively to create new content, like new anatomy scenarios, things like that. So I think it's just a matter of time before we can do what you were saying. But I can't say if it's 1 year or 3 years. I don't think it's significantly longer than the 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I'm not too sure about the 3 years. I think it might be longer.
Maybe.
What worries me is that the AI research that I read in the leading journals, unless there's something going on in the background, but the AI research I read in the leading journals, they're making all the same mistakes that were made in the laparoscopic generation, where they're trying to measure process rather than actually the quality of performance. And I think they're going to have to develop some sort of alphabet that allows them, or tools that allows them, to measure the actual quality of performance, which really means they've got to measure the errors. And I don't see anything approximating that. I mean, and it's certainly not in real time. So I agree with you. It's a few years off. You say 3, I say more like 5 to 10, and that's assuming the bubble doesn't burst.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a question what you expect though, because in my mind, you still need to have the underlying functionality created in the simulation. I mean, first the hardware needs to be able to measure what you want to measure in a realistic way. But then you have in the software, you need to have the software capability created from the start. But if you have that, then I think you can have AI to make it to sort of evaluate it, to assess it, and a lot of that. But I think the underlying functionality still need to be created. And if you use AI to make it faster, that's one thing, but it's still going to be made by man, so to say.
Yeah, yeah. And the irony is, I think, we mean the time, the effort that it takes to actually label things, and then the effort to train it is huge. And the quality of the labeling that I see in a lot of situations is very poor. But if you can get something, for example, for the mechanical thrombectomy that Mentice built, I mean, I think that a lot of the cases for training the AI will probably be on a simulation, because it's more controllable, it's more standardized, it's more precise. You have the mathematics there. And there seems to be very few groups actually using simulation for training the AI, which I think probably is the direction that they should travel. So the device manufacturers seem to be comfortable with using virtual reality simulation for marketing. They seem less comfortable with using virtual reality simulation as a training tool. You've been in the industry for a long time and in different contexts. So why do you think they're more comfortable with marketing rather than metric-based, physics-based virtual reality simulation for training?
I touched upon it before, and I think, I mean, I think there's quite a bit of value in what we call marketing tools. It's not only just marketing tools. I mean, it's a lot of the work that we do today where we provide relevant understanding for a complication or the behavior of the device and so. But so there are a lot of use cases, as I said before, that where you can use simulation without the metrics or the proficiency-based progression structure. But I really think that it's a mix. The reason why it's not more structured, I think it's a mix of probably lack of understanding coupled with what I said before, the sensitivity of really assessing skills of doctors and clinical staff. That's still, I think, in discussion I've had with companies, they tiptoeing around that. Is it really our responsibility? Should we really do that? What will happen if we do that? So I think that and then maybe a third point is what you mentioned before, the actual cost and effort of defining that program. So those three would be the reason, really. So I really think going back to what we talked about before, I think you need to have a force chaining that perspective. Either you have a couple of device company taking the lead and demonstrating by example the effect of that, or you need to have a regulatory change or a regulatory body of some kind saying that stop with this. Now we have a different structure. Here's the requirement, and then you have to live up to that.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with marketing. I mean, I know that the industry, they've got to make a profit. I really don't have an issue with that. But coupled with that, you've got to train people to effectively and safely use your device. And one of the uncomfortable messages that a lot of the manufacturers are receiving, and this isn't published evidence, that some of the clinicians that they're using for their faculty and have been for the last 10 years are really not very good at what they do when you objectively assess their performance. And this has come as a shock to them, because the irony is, if you want to know whether a surgeon's good or not, ask the theatre sister.
Yeah.
If you want to know whether somebody's good at training or whatnot, ask the device manufacturer's professional training staff. They know this. So I'm not too sure why the hierarchy is having difficulty to accept this. Because if you have somebody that's not good at doing the procedure, they're not going to do good skills training. And it seems to me that the device manufacturers they know it, but they really don't want to know it, and they certainly don't want it quantified.
Exactly.
But it impacts on the sales of their device. I think if you train somebody properly, they're confident in the use of their capacity to use that. You're going to have less complications. You're going to have somebody that's safer and better at using the device. And I think they're going to purchase more devices to implant.
That's always been. I mean, both you and me see many examples of the negative side of that. If you run into issues, I mean, several of the devices both you and me work with have had those kind of issues, and you see the negative impact on sales of something like that happening. And I think it's clear. I mean, I always talk about the speed to volume. I mean, in order for you to get a device to sell in volume, you need to have a large group of physicians properly trained in order to use that device safely, and only then you're going to have the sales number going up. So it's very clearly linked to that. But as I said before, that also makes it a bit sensitive, because then you can argue that the device company only provide training to sell more, which is not really the only thing they do. They also make sure that when you provide a device, you also provide safe care for patients. You're saving patients. So yeah.
Yeah, and your experience globally, not just in Europe, but in the US, because you spent a long time in the US, you think that's an uncomfortable issue for the device manufacturers to deal with, to embrace, to think about?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
And
It's a sensitivity, absolutely. I mean, I face that regardless if it's Europe or US or even Asia, but I think in a lot of cases it's either US or Europe. But no, I really see that as one of the big issues.
Okay, if we move away from industry for a second, do you think teaching hospitals should have their own simulation suite for trainees to use? And what, in your view, would be the optimal approach for those hospitals? Is it every hospital? Is it only teaching hospitals? Is it index hospitals? Is it, what do you think?
Obviously, I have to say every hospital should have a Mentice device. I would say that.
Okay, let's be sensible now.
No, but I actually I've seen since I started 20 years ago or so that I mean we're coming from a situation where you create big multi-discipline skill centers, things like that. I mean, you had in US the Kennedy bill, the Kennedy bill back in 05 or 06 or 07, that a lot of hospitals got government funding to build training center, and you build these massive buildings with all kinds of simulation and training equipment. And that might have worked for some specialties, but if I look to what we work with and vascular space, I mean, there's a fairly focused group of people. There's 4 or 5 or 6 different specialties or groups of physicians that have the different requirement. So I've really seen over the years that it seemed to be way more effective to move the simulation activity out to the departments and really make sure that you have a structure where it's not only, as we talked about before, fellows and residents or trainees using simulation, maybe just then it's maybe only a couple of times a year, but really find a way to get it integrated in their weekly structure. I mean, use it for, what are the interesting cases during this week? I mean, what are we training for? What are the new devices, procedure we need to train on? Really get it integrated so everyone get used as a daily use tool rather. Because if it's delegated back to something you use a couple of times a year, eventually it's going to fade out and it's not going to be used in a structured way. So I think that the most effective way we're seeing is that it's close to the cath lab, it's available, easy to set up. You can use it when you have an hour off between cases. You have the proctors close that can help you, and it's that's the way it should be. It should be you should be able to start it up in a matter of minutes, and you can run a case or two or run a session in a structured way with a proctor or a mentor close by. That is my way, the best way. And then I think all these different specialities should really have access to a simulator with the proper program and the proper structure to make that work. Yeah.
The endovascular simulators, in my view, are the best. The physics-based endovascular simulators are the best virtual reality simulators in medicine. And I've long held that view. I mean, I also think I would pick teaching hospitals that have a bulk of trainees for those disciplines. But I also think that physics-based virtual reality simulation should be mandatory. It should be a non-negotiable part of the residency's training, and that they demonstrate the benchmarks and so on. I think that should be centrally funded, because a lot of the hospitals are finding it tight, and they use that as an excuse to not fund those. So I think it needs to be funded either by the European Commission or departments of health. And the hospitals, they would have to compete for it, but it would also be quality assured what they're actually doing it. Would this, centrally funded simulation units in hospitals, funded by either the Department of Health, I'm thinking of Ireland and the UK and in Europe, funded by the Departments of Health or the European Commission, would this be a good investment? And why do you think it would be a good investment? I'm not just thinking residents. Okay, I'm thinking primarily residents, but I'm not just thinking residents.
No, I think it needs to be. I mean, go back to what you just said. I think it's important that this is continuous training. That this is lifelong training, I mean, you keep honing on your skills. I mean, you know what you said before. It's so much new technology coming out and new devices every single year. And I mean, everyone need to train throughout the entire career. So that's why it need to be there, and people need to change their mindset that this is just I train in my early days and then I'm done. You know, so I think that's the first point. But to answer your question, if there would be value for money, I certainly think so. But I think in order to put that structure, you need to have a very clear view on who has the responsibility and who can make the call of what you're going to do. What is the, I mean, if you talk about certification or whatever it is, I think that structure is just not in place. I mean, I think right now there are, as I said initially, there are a number of different stakeholders between societies, regulatory bodies, industry, hospitals, and physician organizations. So and it's not just clear who owns that responsibility. So there's been, as you know, there've been multiple attempts. I worked with American Board of Internal Medicine in US some 10 years ago that have a very ambitious program for cardiologists to certify them and recertify them, and they are implementing simulation. They got massive pushback from multiple different directions on why they did that and how they could impose requirements like that on doctors. So I think it just needs to be thought through carefully, and it should be implemented. But I think you need to work out the structure. I think just getting the resources or money obviously would not help. I think there's more things you need to figure out first. You know.
I mean, I think simulation centers, however it's worked out, you know, certain index centers in a country or in academic medical centers, whether in Europe and the US, I think that's inevitable. I mean, the European Commission, I'm assuming you know, but their push now for micro-credentials for technical skilled performance and for robotics for endovascular procedures and so on. And they don't just want to hear that somebody's gone on a course. They want to know actually what they can do at the end of the course. And the fact that the micro-credentials are delivered by the universities means that there's an agreement across Europe that if I get micro-credentials in Germany, they'll be accepted in Ireland, you know, or in Belgium. And I think that's a good, but it's going to have to have teeth, and it's going to need money, because the hospitals that I work with, they use that as an excuse not to purchase the simulations. But it's more than that, and I suppose that leads on to my next question. Suppose these centres were funded and the simulations were available for the trainees. Would you be happy for the trainees just to go and play on the simulators, or would you be hoping that they did something more than that?
Would that be a trick question, Tony, or?
That's not really a trick question.
No, I know what you're getting. No, of course not. I think that if you don't provide a structure for how the simulation should be used, people will lose interest rapidly, and you will not create any value. So obviously there need to be a structure and a required learning and all of that. So I mean, there are some obviously, if you go back to residents and fellows, there's some value in sort of market the field and make young physicians interested in an area, but that's just a small part of it. So if you're talking about really getting the value out of the technology, you need to have a really defined structure and provide structure.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, it wasn't a trick question, but I was curious what you would say. I mean, IRIS is a European robotic simulation center for cardiovascular procedures, and we've just started running our courses. And there's two important things have happened. One is the European Heart Rhythm Association has released a scientific statement from the Society and the European Society of Cardiology that basically says, okay, simulation is a fundamental part of training, and that basically what they've said is it's got to be proficiency-based progression simulation training, which is a big deal. And on the more applied end, we've started running the courses. I think we're on our third or fourth course now. And the trainees, the thing that we're discovering, well, I'm not discovering, I was saying it for a while, the thing that the trainees want more simulation-based training. Mm-hmm. And what I'm saying to the faculty is we've got to move more of the didactics online, and we've got to give them the maximum amount of time on the simulator. Because the trainees understand the value of the simulation. It allows them to train on a good simulator in a safe space away from the patient. And it's safe for them to make mistakes because they can learn more from the mistakes than they can actually from getting it right. But I think that simulation centres in hospitals, whether it's probably academic training centres, university hospitals, I think that's going to be inevitable. But I also think you're quite right that it's got to be something structured. They can't go a trainee or faculty who says in front of me, well, I'm going to play on the simulator for a while. And I said, no, you're not. You're going to train on the simulator for a while. There's no playing on the simulators on this course. Because it's a very significant part of how we train people.
But I mean, you have every specialty, every faculty is their own entity, sort of. So I think, I mean, if you're going to work it procedure per procedure or faculty or specialty per specialty, it's going to take a long time. So the question is how do you approach it? You know, if you manage to do it in one area, how do you make it move to the next one? So I think there is a structural element of this here you need to figure out.
Yeah, but I think you as industry and me as an academic, I think we're partly at fault as well, because a young colleague of mine said to me, he says, Tony, he says, proficiency-based progression simulation training, he said, it's not that the evidence is not there. He says, you haven't sold it, or we haven't sold it. To the clinical community. And I think he was quite right. You look at the amount of evidence there is on simulation, the effectiveness of simulation-based training. And I mean, and I'm still hearing colleagues talking about how expensive physics-based simulation is. And you match that up against the cost or the consequences of the death of a patient.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think you told me this before, but maybe this is the thing that we will lack that evidence, that actual evidence to as you usually say, body count. I mean, you need that ultimate study. Then maybe I'm not sure if that is the case, but if you need that study to prove that if you use simulation structurally with the proficiency-based progression, this is the outcome you're going to get. If you don't do it, this is the outcome you're going to get. Maybe that's what's needed, but I'm just skeptical. I mean, obviously we have not been able for financial reason to do that study, because that's a very costly thing to do. Then the question, if that would be done in one area, how would that be transferred to other areas? Would you have to repeat that in every single faculty or every single specialty?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I agree with you that study, and it's always been my ambition in that study. But I mean, the person who told me about not selling proficiency-based progression, I think he was right. It resonated. I mean, I don't think it's going to be one thing that's actually going to get simulation over the line. I think it's going to be multiple factors. And over the last 5 years or so, I think the evidence has been accumulating. Industry, I mean, the fact that they have their own published prospective randomized blinded studies published in leading medical that demonstrates their simulation-based training is they have the simulators, but they're not using them properly. And I think there's almost like a cascade building up. But you're quite right. I think we do need that ultimate study that's prospective, randomized, it's squeaky clean, and it basically shows a body count, where there's no ambiguity that this is the cause and effect.
Yeah.
So, in your opinion, how should VR simulation be used and is not currently in the medical device sector and in healthcare?
I mean, it's always, I mean, regardless if we come from industry or go directly to hospitals, it's always the training of physicians that is the end goal here. So, I mean, I think that the reason why industry has been driving this is because there you have the link to value and the ability to actually fund simulation that ultimately is provided to doctors. But if I look at what we do now in hospitals, I mean, it's always been said that hospital for us is the ultimate opportunity or the ultimate target. I think that right now we probably target, I don't know, less than 5%, less than 3% of the opportunity in hospitals, since it's just part of a fellows residency program that is used for simulation. It's not really providing the structure all the way to training them to a specific goal, but even less so for the practitioners used in their continuum for certification on new devices, new procedures for also. So I think that we can use simulation way more, way broader. I mean, if you look at the process of teaching a practicing physician a new procedure like heart valves or structural heart, and then helping them to learn to use a new complex device like a mitral valve or something like that. That's today a 6 to 9 months process, maybe more in some cases. But simulation is only used for the first part of that. And I think that if you have a program like you're talking about, you can use the simulation much further and in a very cost-effective way, and reduce the time to proficiency for those trainees significantly, which would obviously lead to better outcome, lower cost by industry and so. So I think that there is a lot of opportunities to really extend where simulation is used. I also see that if we provide, I mean, we continuously improve the realism of what we do. And we also have been working a lot with structures to provide unique patient information or unique cases, that we say, all the way up to patient-specific situation. I think that if we can continue to improve that, we can provide way more learning capability or ability for physicians to really practice and learn on every single situation, up to the point where you can train before and after a procedure. I mean, you can prepare for a procedure, you can warm up in a proper way, but you can also, after the procedure, work on what went right, what went wrong, and how can I improve to the next time. You can also bring up situations from the week, as we talked about before, and train the entire group of people on making sure that we always together improve on what we do. If you do all of that, I mean, the opportunity for use of simulation in our area it could be, I mean, 50, 100 times larger, and we can provide significant value to healthcare. I mean, you know, there's so much challenges around now. Costs are increasing. We're all getting older. You can provide very advanced, complicated care. You're not getting older, Tony, but the rest of us are. And you provide very high cost care, way up in the age spectrum. So I think it's just important to use technologies like simulation to help improve productivity, reduce cost, and make sure we provide better care, really. So there's a lot of opportunities. Yeah.
I know, I totally agree with you. I mean, unfortunately, I think a lot of medicine and healthcare looks at simulation as some sort of magic bullet, and it's not. It's a tool, but it's a very powerful tool. I mean, there was a friend of mine many years ago. He'd just come back from 3 weeks in France, and I met him in the evening, and he said to me that he had been operating that day, and he had felt very de-skilled. He'd been away for 3 weeks, and that led to a subsequent study that we published in Annals of Surgery. that shows once you're away from the job for about 2 weeks, you significantly decrease. And so I use simulation primarily for training, for residents or fellows or for a new device. But that surgeon could have gone to the simulator and they could have got their skills back up to a level again. I mean, there's so many uses. I totally agree with you. So what do you think the future holds for physics-based VR simulation in medicine and in healthcare? Where do you see it going?
We will be able to provide a situation or an environment where clients and hospital can create their own content and in a much faster and effective way to make the information relevant for all kinds of situations. And if you couple that with structures for metrics and proficiency-based learning, I think we can provide very relevant training for all levels of expertise of physicians, but also other clinical staff like nurses and techs. So but it needs to be integrated in the daily clinical practice and be a natural part of your work. And people need to get paid to use simulation. They need to be part of the requirement. That's not the case. So it's a lot of things that need to be changed in the structure and how people are reimbursed and paid for what they do. Because today, I mean, if the people have to use their own private time, sort of, in a lot of cases to go on a simulator, which is not right.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I mean, I think I've always valued simulation, and particularly the endovascular simulations. I mean, I think I bought the first one that you produced in Europe.
Yeah.
And I mean, in comparison today, there's a significant but even back then I saw the value of it. And I look around at some of my colleagues in clinical medicine and in industry, and they see it as some sort of magic, but it's not. It's a tool, but it's a very, very powerful tool that can be used in many contexts. And unfortunately, at the minute, that it's not. But I'm also cognizant that part of that may be my fault, that I just assumed people would understand and get it. And unfortunately, not as many of them have got it as I would like.
Yeah, I don't think you should take responsibility for that, Tom. I think you have helped a lot, and we all have tried to move the development of this over the years, and I think we come a fair a bit on the way there, but certainly a lot more we can do. So yeah.
All right, Göran, thanks very much. It's always good to talk to you as usual.
Thank you, sir.
All right. All right.
Pleasure. Thank you.